Good morning, fellow Toastmasters. And I'm very happy to be up here again. Remember last time we spoke, I told you about my time in the United States Army, and I was in the Finance Corps. Well, when I was in the Finance Corps, I helped develop a travel program for the government, for a government travel system, because the government was paying over $3 billion a month in late fees because they weren't paying their travel credit card bills. And I helped design a program, and I would go around the country and teach in the military installation and the base commanders about how to use the system. And I ended up saving the government over $1.8 billion a month in late payments. So because of this, I was awarded a Joint Meritorious Service Medal, which I was actually very proud of because it's a very rare, hard-to-earn medal. But I did get remarried while I was in the Army, and my wife actually worked at the Defense Finance and Accounting Service where I was located, and she was a GS-13, which is pretty high up. So when it was time for me to re-enlist, I was offered a promotion to go to Korea, and she told me she had no desire to go to Korea, and she was in a good position. She wanted to keep her job and not lose her rank. So I decided I had to separate from the active duty military, and I went into the Indiana Army National Guard, Air Assault, which I was actually very thankful for because it was much more exciting. Got to go back and jump out of helicopters again. Got to do a lot of fun things. I did that for a little while, and my first job when I got out of the military was actually with active duty military, was actually with the Defense Finance and Accounting Service as a civilian. So basically the same job I was doing in the Army, I switched over to do again as a civilian. My very first day in the job, September 11th, 2001. So needless to say, 2 days later I was activated and I redeployed. Saw some hard times, but then after a couple deployments, my wife got repositioned in California, in Sacramento, California. So I took a job, I transferred my position with the Army National Guard in Indiana to the reserves in California. And I actually got an AGR, which is called Active Guard and Reserve, so which is basically you're on reserve, but you're on active duty. So I was actually full-time reservist. And I was in psychological operations. Most people are pretty unfamiliar with what psychological operation is. That's basically win the hearts and minds. From the Art of War, Sun Tzu was the author, and that was really a big concept in what he did. My final deployment to Iraq, I was a tactical team leader with psychological operations. When I finally arrived in Iraq, I established a team. I had 9 infantry soldiers who were my security detachment. I had 2 other PSYOP soldiers, short for psychological operations, PSYOP, and I had 3 interpreters. I had a Kurdish, an Iraqi, and a female interpreter. A female interpreter is very, very important. It got me to be able to do a lot of things that people could not do on the normal. Because over there, if I wanted to talk to Susie, I would have to use my female interpreter, Karen, because if I go to a house and the only person home was Susie, if I talked to her and there's not her husband or her father was not there, that's almost a death sentence. The husband could leave her or beat her. So when I spoke to you and your husband or your dad wasn't home, I would talk to Karen and Karen would talk to you because I didn't want anything negative to happen, of course. PSYOP, what I did when I was overseas, this is basically what I did for a living. I would go out and I would talk to the villagers, I would talk to the elders of the communities, I would talk to the religious leaders, I would talk to the military leaders and the government officials. I wouldn't ask them about the bad guys or where the guns were. I wouldn't ask them about what the main supply routes or anything like that. I would just talk to them about life. How are things going with you? And if they told me about the need of an irrigation canal, I would talk with civil affairs or engineering to try and meet their needs. We'd have those items built. If they needed school supplies, we actually built several schools. And during that time, they struggled getting supplies for their children. So there were people from around the world that would donate school supplies, backpacks, pencils, pens. So we would provide backpacks in hundreds to the communities. So we'd try and meet all their needs. And over time, I didn't have to ask questions. People started to trust me. They liked me. All the children knew me as Mr. Jerry. Actually, I was part of PSYOP as part of the psychological operations, as part of Special Operations Command, SOCOM. So we were actually the first people in country with the digitally patterned uniform. Everybody else had the old desert patterned camouflage uniforms. So we were the first people in country with that uniform. So people weren't quite sure who I was, what I was doing. So when I went out in missions, everybody, my team, always called me Jerry. They didn't call me by rank because in that culture, enlisted soldiers didn't get a lot of respect. If I talked to an officer as an enlisted soldier, they wouldn't talk back. So everybody knew me as Mr. Jerry. And if the battalion commanders or the company commanders would go out with me, they would call me Jerry as well. They would never use rank. So when I go into the communities, all the children knew me as Mr. Jerry. So I'd drive up in our vehicles, and my Humvee had a large loudspeaker on top of it, so it was very easy to identify because we would do things like surrender appeals and things like that, or messages to the public. But the children saw that, and they always wanted me to play Michael Jackson or Britney Spears. So we'd pull in the village and we'd play some music for them. But all the children loved me. And because of this, over time, people started talking to me a lot. And because of this, the insurgency wasn't too fond of me. We had people from outside of my forward operating base that I was on that would come to my base with hand-drawn maps of enemy weapons placements and things like that, and enemy main supply routes. So because of this, insurgency was not too incredibly happy with me. So I actually had a $20,000 bounty placed upon my head. I became the only enlisted person in the country with a by-name bounty. And eventually, that did have consequences. It's a weird thing to be proud of, isn't it? I did something right, but that's what I did. We actually had a battalion-sized mission that was going to happen. The entire base, basically, that I was operating on, was going to go out and do a cordon and search, basically a door-to-door search for enemy weapons and activity. My team, usually what I did, I would go to where I was going to operate for the day at high rates of speed, one, because we already had a target on us, but now I had a by-name bounty, so if I was going to go to one of the mahalas or villages, I would travel at high rates of speed until I got there for the day and we would talk. But I got tasked to go out with the battalion. We had one section that was going to go north, one was going to go south, and I was going to go down the middle because I was operating control. So I had one team north, one team south. So instead of 3 vehicles doing 45, 50 miles an hour, I was a 27th vehicle and a 69 vehicle convoy, and they waited for me. My vehicle ran over an IED, an improvised explosive device, basically evaporating the rear half of my vehicle. Because of my vehicle, that loudspeaker, they just waited for it. And after the explosion, there was a 57-minute-long gunfight that took place. My driver was thrown 25 meters from the vehicle, shattered one of his legs. My driver was blown out, had minor burns to his back and shoulder. My gunner was thrown 25 meters from the thing. The person who was sitting behind me was Captain Hill. He was the intelligence officer for the battalion. He took the brunt of the blast, and he actually was thrown from the vehicle. He did not survive, but in the video that was carried on was a camera, and on that camera they're doing CPR, and there wasn't a scratch on his body. He had a little bit of blood coming out of his ear, and he died instantly because the percussion of the blast ruptured his brain. Behind my driver was one of my security detachment, Sergeant Secure Guy, who actually was sitting behind my driver and was my roommate and my good friend, and he took the brunt of the blast, and they couldn't recover most of his body. After the explosion, before they could evacuate me because of the gunfight, the helicopters couldn't land. I was shot once in the right shoulder, 3 times in the right leg. During the explosion, my breastplate ruptured in my stomach. I lost 1/4 of my stomach and 1/3 of my small intestines. Fractured my spine in 3 places, and I actually have a titanium rod replaced in the tibia of my left leg. A bad day. But they did get me out of there, and I survived, and I'm thankful. And my main message with all this, and this all sounds terrible, but the main message with this is, it is amazing what you can accomplish when you treat people like people. I don't care what color your skin is, who you pray to, and who you love, because I had a $20,000 bounty on my head because I was nice to people. And that is my main mission in life, is to pass that on to people, let you know that there's much more to life. So when you're nice to somebody, you'll be amazed what you can accomplish. You can accomplish anything. Thank you so very much, and have a good day.